Hello everyone! Today we are going to go over many topics in relation to special education. We will discuss what it is, who qualifies, the history of special education, your rights as a parent, how your child will be assessed, the IEP process, and lastly, other services that go along with special education. So many of you might be wondering, what is special education? Well, special education programs are designed for those students who are mentally, physically, socially, and/or emotionally delayed. This aspect of delay, broadly categorized as a developmental delay, signify an aspect of the child's overall development. This could be physical, cognitive, scholastic skills, which place them behind their peers. Due to these special requirements, students' needs cannot be met within the traditional classroom environment. Special education programs and services adapt content, teaching methodology, and delivery instructions to meet the appropriate needs of each child. These services are of no cost to the family and are available to children until they reach 21 years old. So who is part of special education? As a parent, I'm sure you definitely all are wondering who else, if your child is a part of it, who your child will be with. Well, the Individuals with Disabilities Act (IDEA) requires schools to provide special education and related services to eligible students, but not every child with learning or attention issues qualifies. To be covered, a child's school performance must be adversely affected by one of the 13 listed here. So this could be specific learning disabilities, other health problems, autism spectrum disorder, emotional disturbance, speech or language impairment, visual impairment, including blindness, deafness, hearing impairment, deaf and blindness, orthopedic impairment, intellectual disability, traumatic brain injury, or multiple disabilities. And within each of these, there are different subcategories within intellectual disability. Off to the right here, you see a picture of a young girl with Down syndrome that would fall under number 11. And there are many others that fall under each category. So, what is the history of special education? Well, special education came into existence almost exclusively within the last 50 years. That's kind of crazy to me because that just really isn't that long ago. In the 1960s, multiple laws were passed granting funds for special education students. In the early 1970s, multiple landmark court decisions giving states the responsibility to provide special education resources and schooling to students in need of it. These decisions altered the entire landscape of special education history in our country. In the 1970s, brought more significant improvement to the lives of special education students than any other decade in special education history. Now, down here in red, I have some just big acts that were in place that really stand out for special education history. The Rehabilitation Act of 1973, Education for All Handicapped Children. And this is kind of about in the 1970s brought more significant improvements in the lives of special education students than any other decade. The Rehabilitation Act of 1973 guaranteed civil rights to all disabled people and required accommodations for disabled students in school. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act also known as IDEA. We are going to go into more depth in this in a little bit. And No Child Left Behind explains, then in 1975, the Education for All Handicapped Children Act guaranteed and enforced the right of children with disabilities to receive a free appropriate education. This is also known as FAPE. During its reauthorization in 1997, EHA underwent a number of substantial revisions and became known as the Individuals with Disabilities Act. IDEA emphasized the use of individual education plans, also known as IEPs, and we're going to go into that in a little bit, for all special education students. In 2001 and 2004, the No Child Left Behind Act provided further accountability to schools and added technology assistance and loan programs to help schools acquire needed special education resources. So you can rest assured that your student is going to be in good hands when they enter the school system. So now we're going to turn to some of the terms that you may have recognized me using on the previous slide. Some of these terms to know are IDEA, IDEA, Least Restrictive Environment, IEP, and FAPE. IDEA, it stands for the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. This is the federal law that guarantees the right to FAPE, a free and appropriate education, and the right to be educated in the least restrictive environment in a number of other ways too. The least restrictive environment means that students with disabilities have to be educated in the same setting as students without disabilities as much as possible. We want your student to be able to get to know their peers and to be treated as normal as possible. Setting refers to a general education classroom. For example, if your child has or needs specific supports and services to succeed in the general classroom, the school has to offer those supports and services. So that's a really great thing to know as parents, that is one of your rights, that your child is able to participate in the general classroom as much as possible. An IEP stands for an Individualized Education Program. It is a legally binding document. If your child qualifies for special education, this is a very, very important document for you and your child. It spells out your child's education goals, academic challenges, and strengths. It describes how he or she is currently doing academically. It also lists when and where your child receives special education services and accommodations. Teachers are required to follow your student's IEP plan, and as a parent, it's good to be very familiar with what your student's IEP plan is. And then lastly, FAPE. This one stands for FAPE is one of the most important terms to know for your child. Ensures that he or she receives an education that is appropriate to his or her needs. A free, appropriate education is granted for all students, and that is another one of those rights that you as a parent are entitled to. Okay, so now we're going to transition over to the assessment process. Assessments often include various tests, both standardized or criterion referenced, but testing is not the only way that educators measure students' aptitude. Just to insert here, the schools must get the parents' approval before a student is assessed. So just to make sure you are comforted in knowing that this will not take place without your consent. Assessments are evaluations and might consist of anything from simple observations that a teacher or aide jots down while a student's working on an assignment to complex, multi-stage procedures such as a group of teachers assemble a large portfolio of students' work. And some assessments that could be used are individual intelligence tests, samples of student works, observational records, developmental and social history, along with skill evaluations. So those are all possibilities that could be used to help assess your student so that they get the most accurate assessment done. Okay, so the IEP process kind of, for the most part, consists of 3 parts. It's getting the IEP process started, determining IEP eligibility, and preparing for what's next. So to get the IEP started, the parents may asked to have their child evaluated in some cases, and in some cases the school might be the one to suggest the evaluation. So it really can go either way on that. Determining IEP eligibility kind of goes with, does your child have one or more of the 13 conditions that are covered under the special education law IDEA? We saw those 13 earlier in this slideshow. And does your child need services and accommodations to succeed at school? The IEP team decides if your child qualifies for an IEP at a special eligibility meeting. You will be at this meeting as part of the team. They want to include you as much as possible. So just know that entails and incorporates you and preparing for what's next. What will that will happen automatically. If your child qualifies, it will move fairly fast within 30 days. They don't want to waste time. But you'll be part of the IEP team creating and overseeing your child's IEP plan. Under IDEA, you have the right to participate in every step of the IEP process, which I encourage you to do so that you are aware and fully engaged in your students' learning. And I find out what the process of getting an IEP was like for other parents. So it might be beneficial if you bounce ideas off of other parents who have students with an IEP to see how things are going with them and see if anything that they are going through, you can just connect with each other. Okay, related services to special education. There are so many related services that I do not have even close to the amount of services that are provided. Typically, related services are part of a child's individualized education plan, their IEP, as we talked about earlier. But that's not always the case. Related services are as varied and individualized as the kids who use them. The Federal Special Education Law IDEA lists the following as possible related services, and feel free to take a look at any of these. If you think your child or your family would benefit from these, definitely reach out to your special education program and see what they can do for you. Okay, so that brings us to the end of this presentation. Thank you so much for listening. I am so happy to have your student attend this school. We all want to do what we can to help your child succeed. We just feel very fortunate that you entrust us with your child. So thank you for that.